Let's look at Disney then. And clearly that's been where the hype has been around Disney Plus. They have probably the most unique IP globally. I
Yeah.
mean, how do you think this is going to shake out between those two?
Well, I think I don't know, but my intuition is that Disney is going to put more pressure on cable TV in North America than it is on Netflix, because I think what you're going to see is people paying $100, $100 plus for cable bills are going to start to say, well, if I can just get my sports someplace else, like if ESPN Plus is just a little bit more compelling, I can watch news online and I can watch a ton of TV between Hulu and Disney and Netflix for 20, 25 bucks. And so I feel like that's a bad sign for cable, because that value proposition is most out of whack. I don't particularly see a world where Disney being successful puts a massive churn pressure on Netflix. I think it's possible that a lot of people will have both subscriptions. I do worry if you're fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, or eighth in these markets, what that looks like. You know what I mean? Because I think probably I just my intuition is that consumers are going to pay for two, three, or four services. That cable subs are going to continue to go down, and that at some point there's like a limit to how many services people want.
So if you're running HBO, which is kind of the arguably the third player here, what would you be thinking?
Well, there's a bunch of players. I mean, there's Apple Plus, and there's Amazon and
Sure.
HBO and Peacock, and
Mm.
um, uh, well, look, I think they're. I mean, I think they're a little bit late. So I feel like um, they could play it a couple different ways. One is they can be this really blue chip service where it's like everything that they do on TV is good. Like, they have six, seven, eight shows a year, and they're all really, really well developed, and they can continue to strengthen their relationships around the world, so they can make money not being global but selling HBO output packages to regional competitors like Sky and others who need that content. But long term, if you believe that eventually all these services are going to be global, they're going to have to be in a volume game. I think you have to look at it as like consumers are going to want to spend 15, 20, 25 hours a month on a service to stay subscribed to it. And um, people aren't going to want to watch the same things. So, you're going to need, for every 15 hours of a consumer, you're going to need hundreds of hours of choice. And so I think they're going to have to figure out how to get to scale. I mean, it's a boring answer, but
Mm.
they're just going to have to figure out how to produce, either effectively redistribute their content as sales channels, or how do they get to scale?
And getting to scale, there's no other way apart from serving the diverse taste of everyone.
Yeah, I mean, I think Disney might be the exception, because
Right.
I still
Exactly.
feel like, you know, Disney with those hundreds of movies, and they're so blue chip and they're so global that you sort of think, okay, for $7 a month, if I'm watching one of those movies, maybe it's just worth it. So it's The Mandalorian, but it's also hundreds of kids movies that just can be rewatched. But I think for everybody else, it's got to be volume, local content, and massive scale.
And I mean, it's going to be a challenge for even HBO, which have some experience in this. But what about the other cable players that are going to be, like you mentioned, Peacock, going to be moving into this? I mean, what are the challenge for those smaller players?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's I I don't believe, there's sort of six, seven, eight people, groups that are trying to become global, and I don't believe that all of them can be. And so I think it's going to be very fiercely competitive and hard, and out of which probably there's three, maybe four services that really emerge over time, and others will have to be in different business models. Like I think Peacock is smart to be doing AVOD services and look for other ways to kind of grow what they're doing. Um, it, but there's too many platforms relative to, I think, the end game.
And so back to HBO then, because they have, I guess, potential to actually go global and compete um, with Netflix and Disney. We can put Apple and Amazon to the side because they kind of play a completely different game to selling straight subs for video. What is I mean, talking about the diverse taste of consumers and the ability to serve each consumer with different content, how can HBO go about that, from producing 20 good shows a year that they spend a lot of time on, to producing the scale that Netflix produce?
Well, it may be that you need different groups to do those things. So maybe the answer is you don't change HBO. You try to keep that as your blue chip brand. And in the same way that, Disney didn't come in and suddenly say, hey, film studio, you've been producing 10 or 12 films a year, you're now going to produce 100. Like they had different groups pick up those things. Um, uh, and so you have Turner as a resource, you have Warner Brothers Films as a resource, you have lots of assets that can be developed. But it's largely a question of expectations in traditional media, of how much, now that you're part of this uh, integrated pipe and content business. uh, how do you What are the expectations for shareholders? So they could do it, right? Like any of these groups could say, we're willing to forego 5, 6, 7 billion dollars in profit for the next 4 years to get to scale. Um, uh, but that's very scary as a decision, I'd imagine, for a chairman of a board to make, saying like, you know we've been driving down one path for 50 years about what it means for shareholder expectations and profitability, and we're just going to wipe that out for 5 or 6 years. And it's why, by the way, like, people sort of have lots of questions about what Apple's doing, but I don't. Like, I think Apple is in a very, very different position. This is a company that has $60 billion in profit per year. And for them to say, we're going to spend 1, 2, even $3 billion on content, you could practically view that as a marketing expense, which is like, if it just makes their hardware that much more compelling and the brand love a little bit more engaging, like, that's a much less scary decision than a media company that's expecting a certain type of profitability out of their branches.
Well, and they also have almost instant global distribution.
They do. And so, Apple Plus, maybe, who knows what it looks like. It may be an experiment. It may be something that they go more aggressively into. But yeah, I mean, it's not such a risk. And Amazon, I think, um, is more like Netflix and more like Apple in its ability to say, we're just disrupting ourselves, but our business has always been to disrupt bigger businesses. And so it's kind of like, it, given the scale of Amazon as a business, if it makes all the other parts of Amazon Prime that much more effective, it's a pretty compelling reason to be in the content game. So those three feel very different from Disney and Peacock and HBO Max and the decisions they need to make.
Well, and I guess that aligns with the kind of business models they run, right? It's I guess Amazon and Apple are completely different. They monetize via hardware, and Prime and other stuff for Amazon, but and Netflix obviously subscription subs. But these old traditional, legacy media companies,
Yeah.
it's tricky for them to change not only the culture and their business model and compete at scale globally.
Yeah, but I mean, you have to be impressed with what Disney has done, which is,
Of course, I think they stand alone though, right? Disney.
they do, but I mean, just think about it. They separated that business unit, so it's kind
Mm,
of like they can go to the street and say this is our growth business versus our
yeah,
existing business. The acquisition of Fox at that time was amazing.
perfect. Yeah.
All of a sudden, they have scale to make lots of different things, and then they're sitting on all of these pieces of IP that are global. So that's that's amazing. Great for them.